The passenger. I've been driving nights for years, and I used to think there was nothing left on the road that could surprise me. I'd seen fights break out in my back seat, picked up passengers so drunk they couldn't tell me their own name, even ferried couples who were still arguing about whether they were going to break up before sunrise. But there are some rides you never forget, the kind that make you look at every shadow twice. This one started just after 3 a.m, on a stretch of highway so dark it felt like driving into the mouth of a cave. There weren't any other cars, no trucks, not even the distant glow of taillights. Just my headlights cutting a thin path through the black and the soft hum of the engine. That's when I saw him. He was standing beneath a single broken streetlight, a tall figure in a hooded jacket, his head tilted down like he was staring at the ground. I slowed automatically, not even sure why. I guess because there was no reason for anyone to be out there. As the gravel crunched under my tires, he didn't wave, didn't step forward. He just stood there until I came to a full stop. Then, without a word, he opened the back door and slid into the seat behind me. "Where to?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He didn't answer. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror and saw that his hood had slipped back a little, enough for me to see that his face looked pale, wet somehow, though the air outside was bone dry. Slowly, he lifted one hand and pointed down the road. I hesitated, but pressed the gas. The silence inside the car was almost physical. No radio chatter, no music, just the sound of tires on asphalt. I cleared my throat and tried again. "Long ride. You okay?" Nothing. He didn't even look at me, just kept that hand down now, resting it loosely on his knee. Minutes passed like hours. The world outside the headlights seemed to vanish, as though we were moving through some tunnel of darkness that would never end. The dashboard clock ticked to 3:07. I started to get the uneasy feeling that the road was longer than it should be, that I'd somehow driven past my own city limits without noticing. When we finally reached an intersection, I slowed and asked, "Left or right?" His hand lifted again, this time pointing right. I turned. The road narrowed, lined by trees whose branches reached over the pavement like long fingers. My radio hissed suddenly, crackled with static, then went dead. No stations, no signal. The silence felt heavier. After maybe 10 minutes, we reached an area I didn't recognize. Rows of houses sitting far back from the road, most of them completely dark. It was the kind of place that made you wonder if anyone actually lived there. He raised his hand again, pointing toward a side street, and I followed the gesture until we rolled to a stop in front of a 2-story house with boards nailed across the windows. The paint was peeling, the mailbox half rusted through. "This the place?" I asked. No reply, just the faint sound of the engine idling. I glanced in the mirror. The back seat was empty. My heart gave one hard kick against my ribs. I twisted around fully, shining my phone's flashlight across the seat. Nothing. No wet patches. No footprints. No sign anyone had ever been there. I don't know why I got out of the car. Maybe because I needed to know, needed to see if I'd just imagined the whole thing. The night was warm, but my breath misted in the air as though I'd stepped into a freezer. The smell was wrong too, metallic, like rust and something sharper underneath. The grass in the yard brushed against my legs as I approached the path. The front door of the house was hanging slightly open, the boards over one window smashed inward. I stood there for a long moment, just listening. The neighborhood was silent, too silent. No dogs barking, no hum of distant traffic, not even the chirp of crickets. Then, from inside the house, came a faint thud. Something falling, maybe, or someone taking a step. My stomach turned to ice. Every instinct told me to leave, to get back in the car and drive away. But my feet carried me up onto the porch. The wood creaked loudly under my weight. I put my hand against the door and pushed it a little wider. The hinges moaned. The air inside smelled of damp wood and something else, like wet earth, like a basement that had been shut for years. The sound came again, closer this time. A slow dragging noise, as if something heavy was being pulled across the floor. I stepped back, suddenly terrified of seeing whatever it was, and then I heard it. A voice so low and distant that for a second I thought it was the wind. "Drive me home," it said. Not shouted, not whispered, just a calm, hollow plea that froze the blood in my veins. I turned and ran. I don't even remember crossing the yard, just the violent hammering of my heart and the sound of my shoes slipping in the wet grass. I dove into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and floored the accelerator. The tires spat gravel as the car lurched forward. I didn't look back, but as I sped down the road, something made me glance in the rearview mirror. The house was gone. Not small with distance, gone, as though it had never stood there at all. When I finally reached the main road, my dashboard clock read 3:07 again, exactly the same as before. The radio clicked back to life, faint music filling the cab. For a long time, I just drove, hands locked on the wheel, afraid to stop, afraid to pick up another passenger ever again. I called in sick the next night, and the one after that. I even thought about quitting altogether. But you can't stop driving forever, not when it's your only income. It's been months now. Most nights are normal. But every so often, when I'm out late and the road is quiet, I'll see someone standing under a streetlight, perfectly still, waiting. And every time I pass them, for just a second, I feel the car sink slightly, like someone has taken the empty seat behind me. I never look in the mirror anymore. Room 306. I was halfway through a cross-country drive when the storm hit. Sheets of rain hammered the windshield so hard I could barely see the road. Lightning forked across the sky, turning the empty highway into a stuttering nightmare of light and shadow. I'd been driving since early morning, and my eyelids felt like lead. When I saw the flickering neon sign for a roadside motel, it felt like salvation. The place looked like something out of another era. Peeling paint, a vending machine humming outside the office, a sagging vacancy sign that buzzed with each flash of lightning. I parked under the awning and ran to the door, drenched in seconds. The man behind the counter looked like he hadn't moved in years. Thin grey hair clinging to his scalp, eyes that didn't quite focus on me as he slid the key across the counter. "Room 205, he said flatly. "Checkout at 11. I nodded, too tired to talk, and took the key. The hallway smelled of damp carpet and cleaning chemicals that didn't quite mask something sour underneath. My room door stuck before opening with a groan. Inside, the room was just what I expected. A bedspread patterned with faded flowers, a small table with one chair, a television from the early 2000s. The air conditioner rattled in the window. I peeled off my wet clothes, hung them over the chair, and sat on the edge of the bed, just listening to the storm outside. Rain drummed against the window, thunder shook the glass. Then I heard it, faint, rhythmic, coming from above me. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth. I frowned. The man at the counter hadn't mentioned anyone staying upstairs, but it was a motel, not a monastery. People were allowed to walk around. The pacing went on for a long time, steady enough that I finally got up and turned on the TV just to drown it out. At some point, I must have dozed off. When I woke, the storm had passed. The room was silent except for the hum of the AC. Then the footsteps started again. This time, they were faster, heavier, as though whoever was up there was running from one end of the room to the other. Then, a pause, and a single loud thud directly above me, like something had fallen. I sat frozen, staring at the ceiling. It was after 2 a.m. I thought about calling the front desk, but the idea of explaining that I was losing sleep over footsteps felt ridiculous. Instead, I put on my shoes and stepped into the hallway. The air felt heavier out there, as though the storm hadn't really left. The staircase was at the end of the hall. Each step groaned under my weight. Upstairs, the corridor was darker, the overhead light flickering. Room numbers were painted on the doors, most of them crooked or chipped. I walked slowly, counting them as I went. 301, 302, 303. When I reached 305, I stopped. The last door in the hall was just ahead. The number plate was missing. The door itself looked different, older somehow, its paint a duller color. I raised my hand to knock, then froze. From the other side came a scraping sound, like fingernails dragging across the wood. I stepped back, heart pounding. That was when I noticed something. The carpet in front of the door was damp. Not just damp, soaked through, as if someone had dumped a bucket of water there. The rest of the hall was bone dry. I didn't knock. I turned and walked back downstairs, faster than I meant to. The man at the counter looked up as I approached, as though he'd been waiting. "Someone staying upstairs?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. His expression didn't change. "Nobody's upstairs." I blinked. I heard footsteps running from the room at the end of the hall. "There is no room at the end of the hall," he said flatly. "We closed off the top floor years ago. Pipes burst, water damage. Nobody's been up there since." I opened my mouth to argue, then shut it. The look in his eyes stopped me cold. Not annoyed, not angry, but tired. Like this was a conversation he'd had too many times before. Back in my room, I locked the door and sat on the bed, listening. For a while, there was nothing, just the rattle of the AC. Then, softly, came the sound again. Footsteps, directly above me. I pressed my hands to my ears, lay back, and tried to convince myself it was just the building settling, just some leftover water dripping in old pipes. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke at dawn, the room felt different, colder, as though the AC had been running all night, even though it was off. My clothes on the chair were damp again, wet enough to drip onto the carpet, and written on the fogged window in long, thin letters were 3 words: "Stay in 306. There is no 306. I checked out before the clerk even asked for the key. He just nodded once, as if he'd expected me to leave early. I don't drive that route anymore. But sometimes, when it rains, I wake up in my own bed to the sound of footsteps overhead, slow, steady, pacing back and forth, waiting for me to move. Knock, knock. My friend asked me to house sit for her while she was out of town. It was an easy favor. Water the plants, feed the cat, make sure no packages sat on the porch too long. The house was small, cozy, tucked at the edge of a wooded lot. I liked it the moment I arrived, the way the trees whispered softly when the wind moved through them. The first night was quiet. I made tea, curled up with a book, and almost forgot I wasn't at home. Around 2 a.m, just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard it, a knock at the back door. 3 slow knocks. I sat up in bed, heart suddenly hammering. I don't scare easy, but there's something about hearing a knock in the middle of the night that feels wrong. I grabbed my phone and padded into the kitchen. The back door had a small window at the top. I stood on tiptoe to look outside. No one was there. I told myself it was probably the wind or a branch hitting the frame, and went back to bed. But just as I was falling asleep again, I heard it. 3 knocks. Louder this time. I turned on every light in the house and checked the yard. Nothing. The cat sat at the edge of the kitchen, ears flat, staring at the door. She wouldn't come closer. The second night, I stayed up late watching TV, trying to distract myself. Right on schedule, just past 2, the knocks came again. This time, I crept to the door quietly, careful not to make a sound. My breath fogged the glass as I looked outside. A man was standing at the edge of the yard, too far to make out his face, just a dark shape between the trees. He didn't move, didn't step closer, just stood there like he'd been waiting. I backed away from the door and turned off the light. My phone said 2:07. When I looked back, he was gone. On the third night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with every light off, waiting. At exactly 2 o'clock, the knocks came. Slow, patient, like the person on the other side knew I was listening. I didn't move. Then, from outside, came a voice, quiet, male, and it said my name. The sound of it rooted me to the chair. No one should have known I was here. I hadn't told anyone I was house-sitting. The voice came again, closer now, as though the man was right up against the door. Open up. I grabbed the phone with shaking hands and called the police. By the time the patrol car arrived, the yard was empty. No footprints, no sign anyone had been there at all. I told my friend about it when she got home, half expecting her to laugh, but her face went pale. It happened to me too, she said quietly. 3 nights in a row, always around 2. I moved out the next month. I don't stay overnight at other people's houses anymore, but sometimes when I'm in bed after midnight, I swear I can hear faint knocking, 3 slow knocks, somewhere far away, as though the sound is traveling through the walls, coming closer. And last night, just before 2, someone whispered my name outside my own bedroom window.